topic. Well, thanks for that, but far too much to sort of get through, and I think other people have touched on some of this. So I wanted to pick up on that question at the back about corruption, because I think Des is right that, you know, in a sort of general sense, we do all know that there's a bunch of people in charge, and they'll do more or less what they want, and, you know, we all kind of suffer the consequences of that. Now, one part of this is that not everybody kind of thinks like that. You know, frankly, people genuinely do believe that we live in a vaguely sort of liberal democratic society, that if you vote for someone it's going to make a difference on some level, that the media is run by decent, well-meaning sorts, that actually things are much as they are because that's kind of all right, really. I think that's kind of where most people find themselves. They don't sit there and think, actually, we live in a corrupt, disgusting system based on exploitation. Because if you did all think this, you wouldn't spend very long living in that system. You'd do something about it. So fairly obviously there's this big kind of ideological pressure on people. The way that people get formed, the way their ideas get formed, ends up looking like this. That's one side of it. And that's why corruption, talking about corruption, isn't quite enough. But at the same time, I think, you know, that's where we have to start from if we want to address most people. There's another side to the corruption thing, which I think is actually quite useful as a way of thinking about what's happened here, which gets us into something I was going to say, but then sort of didn't, which was talking about Antonio Gramsci, who is an Italian revolutionary writing in the 1920s and the 1930s. He ended up being locked up by Mussolini and wrote a series of notebooks whilst he was in prison there, which dealt with some of these problems. And the critical problem is, you know, okay, we know that we live under capitalism, it's based on exploitation, but actually there's a set of ideas out there about how people think they live, about what they believe about the world. How are these ideas formed? That's one of his questions. Why do they have this kind of influence, and where do they come from? Why is it that capital is able, or capitalists are able? Because it's a small group of people, it's a small group of people at the top of society. Why is it they're able to present ideas as if we can all be signed up to part of it? And Gramsci talked about something that he called, you know, the national popular idea, that a ruling class can only, if it's a small group of people, can only start to run society if it persuades everybody else that its own interests are in the interests of the whole of society. So it has to say, the people at the top of rich society have to say something along the lines of, what we want is the same as what you want, really. We want the same things as you. Now, what you're seeing with this corruption business is fairly nakedly and obviously that process is breaking down. Because actually you do go and look at what these people are being up to. You know, you see the parties out in the Cotswolds and this sort of thing, and the creme de la creme of British society all gathered around, having a whale of a time, whilst at the same time, everybody else is being told that, you know, we're all in this together, we all have to tighten our belts, cuts have to happen left, right and centre. And then you go through some of the figures of this, by the way. The top 42,000 people, the richest, 0.1% of the population, have seen their incomes rise by anything around, up to around 15% a year over the last decade. At the same time, average wages have stagnated and have fallen for the last few years. The gap between the rulers and the ruled is enormous. And into this gap, the kind of weakness of neoliberalism as a way of trying to persuade us that this is a good way of running the world becomes obvious. That's what the corruption means. That's what it means. They're just left with this corrupt, awful system, and everyone can see it, and that's a moment of opportunity for us, I think. Now, what kind of opportunity is it? I'll just pick up on something Laurie said, because I think it touches on how you organise and how you do everything about it, particularly about the internet. Because on one level, she's right. You know, there's an element to which Murdoch's current crisis is a product of his inability to use technology, right? I mean, what is a phone hacking about? It's about trying to use technology in a certain way. Why are his newspapers in terminal decline? Because they are. Newspaper circulation in this country has fallen about 22% in the last 4 years, right? People aren't buying papers. Why? Because they can go on the internet. So they can get news from different sources. So things are disrupted because of this. But I think we don't also want to get into the kind of immediately then say this must therefore be better, because anyone can write anything on the internet. You can just write something on the internet. It's very easy, relatively, to set up a blog, to open a Twitter account. You can immediately communicate with people. The costs of access to this are actually very, very low in this country. And you can see that, you know, this can potentially be a more open way of accessing forms of information and accessing how people talk to each other and how we can communicate and how we can organise ourselves to try and change the world. You can see the potential there. The trouble is this, the most visited website on the planet is Google at the moment. Everyone goes to Google. And then the next ones are like the BBC, and then there's Sky News, and then there's a few others. And most websites, you know, there's some ludicrous distribution where 99% of websites get, you know, no visitors at all ever, and a tiny little fraction, who's 0.01%, get virtually everyone, because everyone uses Google because you search through it. Now, who's an important part of the Chipping Norton set? Steve Hilton, who is David Cameron's kind of right-hand man, you know, he's the guy who invented the big society for whatever that's worth. Who is he married to? Google's head of PR. So the point here is that you can't disentangle control of the media as easily as that. The internet is just another structure. These are big, powerful institutions, immensely powerful institutions. You think of the amount of stuff that Google knows about you and is sitting on and could use if it was so minded with this pathetic slogan, don't be evil, and all the rest of it. It forms new hierarchies. The critical thing, I think, for us as our socialists trying to organise and the rest of it is understanding that and knowing how to use it. So understanding that there's a kind of hierarchy in the internet and knowing how we can use it against it. So I do think what we've done with Counterfire is an attempt to move in that direction, an attempt to create a way of bringing together lots of information, providing with a degree of credibility of using their tools against themselves. But I don't think the internet is enough by itself to say we can overturn society. We have to organise. We have to organise as we have always done so, in the ways that Des spoke about, you know, right back to the 1800s, where early socialists, early trade unions would come together, would plot, would meet, would try and plan how they were going to deal with the world they found themselves in. That's the kind of critical issue we're faced with here. That's why, you know, the journalism can be an important part of that. The way that we pull things together can be an important part of that. But unless we're actually organised, unless we're all in something collectively, it's not going to change by itself.